So my name is Inês Cabrita. I'm coming from Portugal, and this is the third time I'm doing this session in this course. Welcome for you that you are here at this course. So for the next 1.5 to 2 hours, I'm going to speak about the GCP, the Good Clinical Practice Standards. I'm not sure if you are all aware of, if you have done before any kind of qualification in this matter. No? Yes. So probably most of the things I'm going to speak again is maybe just to make sure that you have it in account. So this is my conflict of interests. I'm coming from Portugal, as I said before. I'm working in an academic CRO, contract research organization, and also I'm working in a department at the Faculty of Medicine, which supports all the research done at the cardiovascular department. So the main objectives of this session is to understand what is good clinical practice. Just to, excuse me, there is nothing in the screen. Can I see it in the screen? Is also to know the basic principles of GCP and to acknowledge what is the importance in conducting studies according to the GCP, and very importantly to be aware of the responsibilities as you as investigators need to know. And how this should be adopted. So just to have an historical background, as you all know, everything started in the Nuremberg Code when there was the Nazi doctors, as you know, that they did experiments, and so there was this big trial, and it was the first time the informed consent was spoken, and it was established, so to avoid, of course, experiments in humans. Later on, the Declaration of Helsinki, as you are all aware of, and the main purpose was to not to have differences within the countries and different approaches in medical research. And so later on, the ICH, the International Conference of Harmonization, was established in 1996, and it was a collaboration within the regulatory authorities of the European Union, United States, and Japan. And the mission was to achieving the harmonization of the worldwide, and to ensure that the safe and the effective and the high quality of the medicines and developed and registered was standard across all the world. So this was the main aim, the harmonization of all these standards, and of course to reduce and to avoid to have different studies studying the main thing. So not to have this topic. So the good clinical practice are an international ethic and scientific standards for different aspects. The design, for the conduct, the performance, the monitoring as well, the auditing and the recording, also the analysis of the data, the reporting of the clinical trials, and will provide that there is assurance that the data and the reported results are credible and accurate. So, and especially, and this is always repeated again and again, that the rights and the integrity and confidentiality of the trial subjects are protected, and that this is the main topic. So the objective of this guideline is to unify the standard across the European Union and Japan and the United States, Canada, and Switzerland. And also, very importantly, it outlines which are the responsibilities of the ethics boards, the investigators, and also the sponsors and the monitors. Because it's not just about the investigators, of course, all the stakeholders are involved. And GCP will address what is related to these standards. GCP is widely accepted in at least in 193 countries that follow it, and is expecting to be, of course, worldwide spread, and is general and applicable to all the protocols. It has been reviewed in 2016, which is called the R2 that you have been known, and probably you need to have another certification just to make sure that you have these new standards. And even if many areas of the GCP remain the same, there was some important changes, especially in the risk management of the trial and the data handling. Also, it's very important that the low and middle income countries need to make sure that they clearly follow the GCP as well. Because of course, there is always, they need to give assurance that their data is credible and accurate, and especially that they are protecting the participants. So it's very important for them to really provide and to make sure that they are compliant with GCP in all the studies across the globe. So the reasons for the addendum of the GCP was to encourage the sponsor to implement and improve more efficient approaches, especially in the risk-based monitoring of clinical trials design, and to conduct in the oversight and recording and reporting of the data. And also to update standards regarding the electronic records and essential documents intended to increase trial quality and efficiency. These are the GCP principles. The first topic is the ethics. So it's the ethical conduct of the trials, the benefits that will justify the risks, the right, safety, and well-being of subjects that must prevail. Also related to the protocol and science, the non-clinical and clinical information must support the trial that is conducted, the compliance with the scientifically sound protocol, and also the responsibilities of the ethics committee, the medical care and decisions, and each individually that will perform their tasks. I'm going to speak in more detail in each of these principles and make some examples later on. The other set is the informed consent form, the most, not the most important, but one of the most important principles that we are going to discuss in more deeply during the session. The data and quality of the integrity of the data that needs to be accurate. The EMP, the investigational product, and whatever the media is used, that must conform with the GMPs used per protocol, and quality and control assurance, and the systems with the procedures that must ensure quality of every aspect of the trial. If you want to make any question, please feel free. But we are going to have an exercises in the end, so you can just keep it by the end. So the GCP principles, the first one is that the study must be conducted according to the Declaration of Helsinki and is consistent with the GCP and all the applicable regulatory requirements. The second principle is that any foreseeable risks and inconvenience of the subject must be weighed against the anticipated benefits. And this is especially important when you are designing your own protocol, and you must be totally aware of all these standards. The third one, as I said before, and the rights and the safety and well-being of the participants. The fourth one is available non-clinical and clinical information that will of the investigational medical product being used in most adequate to support the study. Principle number 5, that the research needs to have a scientific background to support it. And the 6 is the approvals that you need to be sure you have in place, or from the Independent Ethics Committee or IRB, prior to any activities of the study that you are going to start. So it's the investigator that needs to be aware of this. About the investigator's brochure, it's a document which has the compilation of the clinical and the non-clinical data of the investigational medical product that will be relevant to the study of the product that will be used in human subjects. It's a document that is sent to the investigators at the site, and it should be reviewed and updated annually. Even if there is no update, you need to be informed that there is no update of it. The principal investigator must be assured that all the study members are updated and familiar with the new information if there is an update. And he has to register and to record their training, and this must be in the trial master file. Also, ensure that all participant sites, if it's a multi-center study and if he's, for example, the coordinator of the trial, that all the sites will receive the updated information, especially participating in the teams at the pharmacies. So I don't know if you have ever looked and see and read an investigator brochure. From my experience, it's a document that sometimes is not so. The investigators, they receive it, but then they are they don't read it, of course, all of it. But it's very important, and some of them they really rely and they will consult it because it's important, especially in the adverse events, etc. So this is just an overview of an example of the contents that an investigator brochure has. As you can see, all the non-clinical studies performed with the investigation medical product, the clinical studies, all the information that you need to be aware. So it's really a very important document that will be your support to understand and to know what is the medication that you are taking care during the research. And since it's so important, the sponsor must have an acknowledgement of the reception at the site, and so there is a tracker of all the investigator brochures sent to the sites, the date it was received, by whom it was received, of course, from the principal investigator, and so it's a really important document that you need to be aware. About the study protocol, of course you all know what is a protocol of a clinical research study, but according to the GCPs there are minimum information and standards that you need to follow. So it will have the description, of course, of the objectives, of the design, the methodology, the statistical considerations, and the organization of the whole trial. And the protocol usually also gives the background and the rationale for the purpose of the trial. So if you are creating again your own research, you need to have in mind all these topics. And ideally, the protocol should be written in a way that you are not going to have lots of amendments. So you need to be very, very careful in the beginning that you include all the information and you design it according to what you are going the results that you are going to study. And so it needs really to be very thorough completely. Generally, the protocol will have to be signed by both the investigator and the sponsor to confirm their agreement that they are going to follow it. And of course, you have seen it as well before. This is just an example of a study protocol, just the cover sheet, of course. And the signatures of the sponsor and the investigator is a commitment. So both of them are going to follow, and especially the investigator, he needs to be aware that from that moment he agrees to follow all the procedures and the protocol content. About the compliance of this protocol, it must be, of course, according to the approved version and to the applicable regulatory requirements and also to the GCP. And again, this agreement to follow the protocol must be documented in a contract or a similar document and signed again by the investigator, institution, and sponsor. And this date of the signature, of course, it's very important according to the approvals of each document, the protocol. And if during the course of the study it is found that changes need to be made, and then another approval must be, of course, sought again from the same ethics committee that has approved the first version. And besides being designed the completely way that we need to, that it should be, of course, sometimes there are amendments to the protocol. And usually these are amendments that can be related to the safety or physical or mental integrity of the participants, the scientific value of the study, the conduct and management of the study that can be changed, and also the quality or safety of any medicinal product used for clinical trials. And they can be substantial and non-substantial. The non-substantial are the changes that are not going to impact about the safety or integrity of the participants. And so they have a different procedure regarding the approvals. But anyway, any change must be notified. All the versions of the protocol must be retained in the investigator site file or trial master file, which is the dossier that you have with all the essential documents. But of course you need to keep the superseded versions. You need to keep all the versions since the beginning. And especially in long clinical trials, usually there are, of course, amendments to the protocol, so you need to have a tracker of all of that. About the Independent Ethics Committee, it's an independent body who has the responsibility to ensure the protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of the human subjects. So they will look at it, all the subjects that are going to be involved in the trial, and to provide public assurance of that protection. So they are going to revise all the protocol, all the procedures that are going to be taken, the investigator, the facilities, the methods, the material that are going to be involved, and especially the procedure for obtaining the informed consent form of the trial subjects. Usually it's constituted of 5 members at least, medical professionals and non-medical, and with at least 1 non-scientific member, and at least 1 member independent of trial, of course, and from the institution that cannot be part of the ethics committee. The communication and approvals must be done according to the study protocol, the investigator's brochure, the recruitment procedures, because these must be described in the protocol, of course. If there are going to be advertisements, some countries they have restrictions about advertisements, so this is, of course, depending on the local rules that each country has, and any document that is going to be given to the patients, to the participants, the ethics committee is going to evaluate, even if it's a letter for them to give to their medical physician, GP, that everything that is going to be sent and give to the participant needs to be approved. And this is also, of course, during the period of the whole trial, there are documents that probably they will be new, so they have to be approved again by the ethics committee. And for any other material that needs to be given to the participant, and also any planned compensation for their time and inconvenience. And this is, again, depends in the local the rules of each country, but if this is allowed, the compensation for example, the travel costs and the meal expenses, they need to be approved. How this compensation will be given, of course, not to have something that is going to be an incentive to the participant, but this is. Oh, sorry. And also the ethics committee is going to ensure that the investigator, the principal investigator, is qualified and experienced, and this is going to be analyzed through his CV, and many times we have received questions from the ethics committee that the CVs are not complete. They don't have written the experience of in clinical research, even if they are very qualified, highly qualified doctors and physicians. They need to have some proof of his experience in previous clinical research as co-investigators, for example, in order to be approved to be a principal investigator that is going to, of course, coordinate the whole team and the whole clinical research at his site. And of course, they are going to be the documents that are going to be approved by the ethics committee. They need to have clearly the version number and the date, so there is going to be a tracker of the changes or amendments of the document. So this list of versions of the documents approved needs to be given to the ethics committee, and these are the documents that are going to be used. And of course, the study cannot begin without the approval has been obtained. And once approval is granted, evidence of it must be kept clearly, indicating which document that were submitted for the approval. So you need to have really with you the approval document, because sometimes it's just that has been approved, but it needs to be you need to have that letter, the proof of the approval from the ethics committee before you start any procedure on the trial. And also, the investigator must be sure that any updates of approved documents, they need to be also be sent for review, and approval of them needs to be in the file. So there are some quizzes just to make sure that you have, of course, all the answers, and just to make sure this is a practical session. And so the first question is, what is the purpose of requesting an ethical opinion for a clinical trial? And of course, this is a bit obvious. So if you want me to, which you think it's the correct answer? Hey, okay, yes, of course it's correct. Some people, of course, they need the ethics approval for the financial part to request a financial support, but that is not the purpose. They need the ethics approval to request financial support, but that is not the main purpose. And it's not also the purpose to have a scientific revision of the protocol, and the other CT number, that is not related with the ethics committee. So the document itself may be replaced by which of the following documents? GCP guidelines, the standard of operation procedure of the trial, the statistical analysis plan, the study management plan that is going to be managed, none of the above, or all of the above. Pardon? All and none? None. Yes, none. All the other parts are important, but are not related with the protocol. For example, the study management plan is related with the sponsor. Is the sponsor that is going to define how it's going to be managed, but I will speak it later on. Okay. The approval from the ethics committee is not required for each of the following: study management plan. They don't need to have approval. The study protocol, the compensation plans for the for the patients and the change of the principal investigator. Correct? Yes. Because all of the other ones, they need to have the approval, especially the change of the principal investigator, which is a major, as you know, amendment. So continuing with the GCP principles, number 7, the medical care must be provided by a qualified physician. This is obvious, but again, it needs to be proved and clearly that he has qualifications for clinical research, not as a doctor. Number 8, not just the principal investigator, but also the research team. They also need to be qualified and trained and have experience in performing their own tasks, not just in general the clinical research, but for example, if there is a specific task to be conducted, that person needs to have proof of the training for that task. Number 5, the informed consent form that we are going to speak later. Number 10 and 11, this is related with the data, how it's recorded and handled and stored in a manner that allows the accurate and the report and interpretation. And this is again very important, and especially the types of media that is used, if it is electronic, if it is, for example, in imaging data. So it needs to be very certain that you can verify the data. Principle number 12, the EMP, the investigation product, must be used in accordance with the approved protocol, of course. And principle 13, systems that assure the quality of all aspects of the trial should be implemented with the focus in ensuring that there is a protection of the subject, of course, and the reliability of the data and the results of the trial. The medical care of the participants. Again, it's important that a qualified physician should be involved in conducting the trial. And he will be responsible for not just the medical care that is going to be given to the participant, but all the study-related medical decisions. As soon as he has the participant participating in the trial, all the medical care is going to be he has to be, of course, involved. He must ensure that there is adequate care provided in the case of an adverse event or a clinical significant abnormality, for example, in the laboratory values or any other test that can be found. He must inform the participant if medical care is needed or an illness that may occur during the course of the trial or any study intervention that he might have, and he should inform the individual's physician if the participant authorizes. So he is also aware and informed about the participation of his patient in a clinical research. And for example, this type of letter that some sponsors have and provide, a letter that or is the patient that gives to his GP or to his physician, or is directly a letter sent by the principal investigator to the assistant physician. So he is informed, especially, for example, prohibited treatment that he cannot have during the course of the trial. If there is any interventional procedure, he must inform the principal investigator. So this communication is essential, and sometimes it lacks this communication, and then it can be not good for the procedures of the protocol, but it can compromise also the safety of the patient, especially in prohibited treatments along the clinical research. So again, the rights and safety and the well-being of the research participants is what must prevail. So everything that we are discussing here is only to protect the patient and that he is safe in participating in clinical research. And also, all the study participants, they must be monitor it if any suspected adverse event occurs. Of course, there are specific adverse events that are described in the protocol, but the qualified physician, he must be aware of everything that is happening to the patient, and then he will see what needs to be reported to the sponsor or not. Being GCP qualified, in some countries it's compulsory to have this qualification, in other countries it's not compulsory. So of course it depends, but it's a recommendation. So they are orientations and recommendations that everyone involved in clinical research should have this qualification. And being qualified, again, is to be capable of making sure these standards are applied. Again, from his education, his background, the training and the experience. And he must be, of course, aware that this is really, really important for not just the regulatory and ethics requirement, but also for the safety of the patient. About the informed consent process, this is the topic that we are going to discuss in more detail, and I'm sure that you have experience, of course, in this matter in your research. But I'm going to speak a bit more about this. So the informed consent process, it's a process which a subject is going to confirm if he's willing to participate or not in a particular trial, after having been informed of all aspects of the trial that are relevant to the subject's decision to participate. And this informed consent is documented by means of a written, signed and dated informed consent form. So there are three processes. The first process is the reading of this document by the participant in an information sheet or consent form. Sometimes they are together, sometimes they are separate documents, but they need to have both of them, of course. First is the information about the study, and then is the consent of the patient. Then there is an understanding of the content of the document and the discussion and information. And the last step is the signature, both by the patient and by the investigator who described and who spoke with the patient about the consent form. Needs to be, of course, the same investigator and not a different person. During the consent process, the participant or their legal representative, that can happen, of course, must be fully informed of all aspects of the study. And the participant, he should have ample time to read and the opportunity to make any questions that he wishes and to inquire about any detail and decide if he wants to participate or not. So it's nothing that should be done in a rush, of course, especially because it's not ethically correct to the patient, but also because we need to be sure that the participant is aware of what is his involvement and to make sure that he's going to be during the whole time of the clinical trial and what is involved, the number of visits he needs to do, the number of visits he has to go to the hospital, not for him to quit and to say that he was not aware of any kind of procedure. So he has to be the full information since the beginning of the trial until the end, the duration, etc. And you must have the written approval of that consent form before start, of course, before give it to the patient, of course, and if any amendment of the document is done, you need to have again the approval. So a oral and written communication information that will be provided must be in a non-technical and understandable language for the patient, and it must be written that all the questions were answered and there was no doubt for the patient about the content of the document. And as you know, sometimes the documents are very long, so you need to make sure that he has time to read and properly he should really read it carefully. The key information that needs to be inside this document, and again, if you are going to create your own research, is you that is going to create this document, is the information about the study, for example, the purpose, the duration, how many patients will be recruited. The patient he should have this information. The key contacts, if he has any doubt, any problem, what are the contacts that he has in order to communicate with the study team. The details, what is expected from the patient, his responsibilities. So what he has to do during the whole length of the study. The difference that to the medical treatment, so it is research, is not an individualized medical treatment. He has to be aware of this, and that the explanation of the benefits and the risks that can be involved, the costs involved, and any compensations that may be eligible. This has to be written as well. And of course, if they change their mind, they can leave the study without explaining why. But of course, we always try to avoid this one of these cases. But of course, they can do it. In our experience, this is very rare. There is always a reason, and so we. And there is not a change of mind immediately, just for sometimes it's their personal life changes, or they move, or they have any kind of problem, of personal problem. But usually, if it's everything, it's really clearly and explained in the beginning, so they really know what they are going to be involved. There are special cases, and in those cases you need a witness. If, for example, the individual, he cannot read, so even if he can sign his name, if he cannot read, you cannot be sure that he has the information of the consent form. So you need to have an impartial witness must be present between the discussion and the presentation of the study to the patient since the beginning. The witness needs to be there in the whole process. If the consent taker does not speak or read the language of the participants, they are not allowed to consent that person without, again, a witness who does understand the participants' language. In many countries, of course, we are facing several national language that is going to be written in the consent form, and many people from abroad. So you need to make sure that there is someone that is going to be present, so you don't have any kind of issues here. And of course, all this procedure must be written in the medical file. So if there is a witness, all this needs to be clearly described in the medical notes. And the ideal is, if there is an amendment to the consent form, would be the same witness to be present. Of course, that would be ideal, but it's not possible every time. But if it's possible, it's the ideal scenario. Another special situations is the assent of minors. Only research that directly relates to the child's clinical condition should be conducted, of course. Parent signatures sufficient by law, but the parental consent should reflect the wishes of the child. So the child must be consulted, and the wishes of the child must be really taken care. The child should assent if competent, and assent is not legally binding, but is favored by ethics committees. Child should be involved as much as possible, again, and the study materials and the language information should be appropriate to the age of the child. Also, special situations in emergency situations. this has to be clearly described in the protocol, of course, and it is when the research is related directly to life-threatening conditions of the patient. And when prior consent of the participant is not possible, and in some situations, of course, it's not possible, the consent of the legally acceptable representative should be sought. But sometimes there is not a legal person, and it can be requested the approval of a consent after when the patient is, of course, in conditions to provide consent. But if that happens, of course, needs to be clearly documented and clearly requested to the ethics committee, this special situation in the procedure of the consent form. This is the same. Important notes about the informed consent process. The consent form, of course, must be obtained by the investigator before any research-related activities occur. So this is, of course, the main topic here. You should give an original copy to the participant. Another one should be in the investigator site file, which is at your site, and it can be a copy in the medical notes, and clearly described in the medical notes of the full content of the process of the informed consent that the patient understood. There was questions, they were answered. The version of the consent form that has been discussed with the patient, and he has accepted. In that date, of course, all this procedure must be written in the medical notes of the patient. Potential participants should never, of course, be coerced or influenced to consent in participating. And only when the patient has fully completed the trial is when you consider that the consent process is complete. It's not just that moment in the beginning when he signs. This consent process is live during the whole period of the clinical research, and it will end only in the last procedure of the patient, the last visit of the patient, when everything is complete. So during that moment, anytime he can withdraw, and so it's an ongoing process. This is just an example of an informed consent. There is a lot of ways to be written, but the content must be there, and it should be dated and signed by the patient and dated and signed by the investigator on the same day, of course. And this is something that needs to be really important, because in some very busy centers, the consent form is given at one time, and then the investigator comes and can sign in another time, but that is the wrong procedure. This is a process that needs to be conducted from the beginning until the end, until the signature of the investigator, in the presence of the patient, without any intervals. I will, I think I didn't give this, I will show you later on. This was just an example. And there are common pitfalls on the consent form that are catched during audits and inspections. And they are, again, that the investigator did not sign or signed before the patient. This happens quite a lot, because he explains to the patient, then he leaves, the patient signs, and then he forgets to sign the consent form, which is a very major deviation. Or he signs before the patient just to be things more quickly, and then it's, of course, totally wrong. The patient did not fill himself all the blank spaces that are allocated to the patient. Then an investigator signed the consent form, but he or she was not included in the study team. So there is no evidence of training to obtain consent, and this happens sometimes in long clinical trials or where the teams change, and then there is a new investigator. No one trained him officially, and he's going to give consent to the patient, and he's not in the team. So this is really, of course, serious. A patient does not write or reads, and he's not able to understand what the investigator is explaining, but signs the consent form, and there is no witness present. Again, there are many patients that they can sign their name, but that does not mean that they can read. So you need to make sure that he really understands and he read what was in the document. Another thing is the consent form is not archived in the patient medical file, so it's not possible to verify if the subject has consented, and also this is important for everyone that is going to deal with the patient, another department also, for example, to know that he's participating in a clinical trial and who is the principal investigator. So this needs to be in the medical file, that he really obvious and clearly that he's participating in a research study. And also quite common is an approved consent form used, and this happens especially during amendments of the consent form, that you have the initial consent form, everything correct, and if there are an amendment to the consent form, the patient has to sign it again. And so sometimes can be a wrong consent form can be given and is not yet approved. So you need really to make sure that you have the approval for what the document you are giving to the patient. The consent form used with the referring wrong patient information sheet. This is less common. And now we have some questions. So, the patient information was given to a potential participant in a clinical trial. How much time should be given to the potential participant to consider all the information and decide about their participation in the trial? At least 24 hours, counting from the moment that it is proposed to participate. 2 weeks maximum period, or what is determined in the protocol. All the time that is needed to the patient to clarify their doubts and make his decision, and this usually is fine in the ethics application. A minimum of 2 hours to ensure that he has time to read the entire document. Okay, you are all perfect. So sometimes, of course, in the special situations, in case of emergency, this cannot be applied, of course. But you should have all the time. In different departments, they have different procedures. Sometimes they give the patient consent form, they take it home, they really discuss it with the family. Of course, this can there are cases, and then the family they don't agree, and the patients they don't want to participate. But is the correct way to have the time, all the time that he needs to really decide according to all the information he has, because there are also situations the patient agrees to participate, and then he goes home, and the son or the daughter they don't want the father or the mother to participate, and so he withdraws the consent form, which is of course not good, and so you need to make sure that he has all the information. When the participant and the investigator sign the informed consent, the 2 originals must be archived and maintained in the trial master file and in the study sponsor installations. 1 copy in the patient clinical process or in the investigator study file, and another copy stays with the patient. C, together with the study investigator and sponsor facilities. D, in the sponsor facilities and with the person responsible for monitoring the study. Okay, perfect. So this is again very important. You need to have the original in your investigator study file. And this can be very obvious, but departments sometimes they have different places and they are all around. The consent form is in another special folder that just to be organized, but he needs to be the original version and signed needs to be in the investigator study file. So of course you should never lose this document with you. About the essential documents. The essential documents are the documents that I have said before are going to be in the trial master file and the investigator study file. So these are the documents that individually or collectively are going to permit that the evaluation of the conduction of the trial and the quality of the data that is going to be produced. They serve to demonstrate the compliance of the investigator, also the compliance of the sponsor and the monitors with the standards of the good clinical practice, and that all the applicable regulatory requirements are in place. These documents are those who are usually inspected by the regulatory authorities and are part of the process for the validity of the trial conduction and the data collected. So these documents are collected prior to the clinical phase, during the clinical conduct of the trial, and following the trial, when the trial is closed. These documents can be assessed through all this period. The trial master file is the file, the dossier, which has all the documents from the clinical trial from all the sites that is going to be conducted, the approvals, the authorizations, the agreements, and should be established at the beginning of the trial, both at the investigator site, which is called the ISF, investigator site file, and at the sponsor office. The description of each document and whether it's kept at the sponsor office or at site or both is found. There is a table and a list of these documents in the GCP, where if you have any doubt, you can go there and you see where the document needs to be located. Of course, the monitor is the person that is going to help you with archiving of these documents. But again, is the investigator responsibility to make sure that the documents are in place and archived in the correct way. And this trial master file, or TMF that is called, is all the documents that are going to be needed to conduct the whole study. This is just an example of a content of a trial master file. So you have the sponsorship, the insurance, the first contact with the site, the feasibility questionnaire, the agreement of the investigator since the beginning, even before, of course, the site is activated, the funding agreements, the supply of the medical product, if there is a CRO, a contract research organization, is their agreement, the randomization, the funding, if there is a grant, everything is going to be included here. The confidentiality agreements, the research ethics committee, all the substantial and non-substantial amendments, the requirements, the letters, the end of trial notification. If there was a serious breach, notification to the ethics committee needs to be here. So this is just an example. This is not the content is not always like this. Of course, this is just an example, just for you to be aware that when it's collecting, or when the monitors are collecting documents from your site, they are going to be for this trial master file or for your ISF, the investigator site file. That is the dossier at your site that will never leave the site. It will always be there, archived for the years that are established before. And so you need to make sure, and there are rules for archiving those files. They need to be accessed only by the research team in a locked cabinet or in a locked room. So it's something that you need to be aware in the beginning, where that dossier is going to be archived. So everything is going to be in place. And the location of these documents and the source documents needs to be also described. So the sponsor and the investigator, they must have a record of the location of the source documents. And how is the storage system used in the trial for archiving in the hospital or in the institution that you are participating? So you need to be electronically. You need to have the IT help just to make sure that you give the information where the documents are located, and if there is an audit trail for any change of the document, if they can be retrieved, the version history, the identification. So you need to have that in the beginning. And sponsors should ensure the investigator that has control of continuous access to the ECRF. The ECRF is, as you know, where you include the data of the study. And they have exclusively control of the data without, of course, identification of the participants. And when copies are used to replace an original document, for example, an EKG, you must provide a copy with a certification that is taken from the original. So it's a certified copy that needs to be given, signed and dated by the person who has done the copy. The source data is all information that is provided in the original records or in the certified copies of the original records of clinical findings, observations, or other activities in clinical trial that are really useful for the reconstruction and evaluation of the trial. The source data are contained in the source documents, which are, again, the original documents or records and the certified copies. That can be laboratory notes, pharmacy dispensing, hospital records, clinical statements, imaging reports. So those are the source data where you are going to take data to be completed in the CRF and analyzed for the clinical trial. And so this data must be verifiable by the monitor when he goes to your site. He needs to have access and to have through the investigator, and he has to verify all the data recorded. It's the investigator's responsibility to make sure that all the records, again, are accurately maintained and all reports are completed and submitted on time. And very importantly, the source data, these documents must be attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original. They need to be accurate and complete. And any change to the source document must be traceable. So if there is any correction, it must be traceable with date and signed and the clarification of what has been changed and why. And also, the source data should not be a replica of the case report form. This can only be a source document, so it's just the clinical record of the patient. So you should not really rely on the CRF form if you have it. So the essential documents, these are a set of orientations for the ALCOA guidelines for the essential documents, that they need, again, to be attributable. So they need that is a data that is traceable to the originator, the person, and which is the system from the device of the instrument that has provided that information, who has performed any action. It's legible, so it can be readable. Sometimes there are several documents that are not legible, so it must be make sure that it's understandable by another person. It's contemporaneous. Data is recorded at the time they are generated or observed per regulatory requirements. So you shouldn't have lots of amendments, information, added new information from something that happened a long time ago. They must be original, as I said before, and accurate. Data, including errors, corrections, edits that are correct, they must be appropriate and fully traceable what was the correction done. Also, they need to be, this is particularly for the electronic records, they need to be complete, consistent, and enduring, and available. And sometimes, this is in more detail, sometimes you really need the help of your IT department to make sure that all the electronic records are correctly handled for your clinical research. Because there are sometimes issues from this type of information, especially for the electronic records. And so you need to make sure prior to the start of the clinical research with your monitor if everything is according to what is established. So just a short list of the essential documents that are, again, included in the dossier, in the investigator site file, which is at your site. This is just a general list, and is much more detailed than this. So you should have the contact list of not just the team but the sponsors. So if you need any contact, it's there, that it needs to be there and updated. The protocol which is in place and any amendments to the protocol, the ethics and the regulatory approvals, all the approvals must be there prior to any start of the study, the participant information sheet and consent form, all the previous version and the one that are in place, the agreements and contracts, if there is a financial contract, it needs to be here too. The delegation log that I think you have seen it before. I will give you an example. Where is the document that the investigator gives special trained and gives responsibilities for some tasks to their team. The participant ID log, I will give you an example, is the only place where there is the information of the patient and their code number. So, and this, of course, this document should never leave the site because it's the document where you know who is the patient participating in the study, and this should be done. It should be included in the investigator site file. The data management, the CRF form, an example, the blank form. Usually, of course, as you know, the most of them are electronic. And so then in the end, you should have a copy and put it in the ISF. All the correspondence and communications, the most important one with sponsor, with the ethics committee that you might have. And study-specific standard of operation procedures or any training log, because there are always different documents for that sponsors, of course, they have. So this is just an example of a general overview of the documentation that you should have at site. And again, this file must be all this, the study team of the trial must have access to this file. So just to make sure that we know all these meanings. What is the TMF, Trial Master File? Is a set of all the essential documents needed to conduct a study. Is a set of the standard of operating procedures explaining how to conduct the study. Is a set of study documents that belong to the study nurses. Is a set of the study documents that are required by the principal investigator. A. Perfect. Okay, continuing with the essential documents, now we have the CRF that I'm sure that all of you have handled in a way or another, the CRF or paper that is more rare now, but it can be used, or electronically. And so this is where all the data for the clinical trial is going to be inserted. And so it needs to be accurate, complete, and legible. If it's, of course, in a paper version, electronically, of course, it's going to be legible. It must be consistent with the source documents. So everything that is included in the CRF must be written in a source document. And this is when the monitor goes to your center and he's going to verify if the data is correctly inserted. is not just if it is correctly inserted, is if it exists written in the patient medical file, because everything that is not written, it does not exist. So if you add information in the CRF, but nothing is written in the medical records, it's not going to be valid, so you cannot do it, of course. And this CRF, even electronically, must be, it has an audit trail of all the corrections that have been done, and by whom, because of course each person of the research team that has this responsibility has their own access, and so you have always the trail of all the corrections and edit of new information in the CRF. So it's very useful to trace any changes or any corrections required by the sponsor or. And additionally, the investigator must maintain all essential documents that are supporting this and retain them as long as is stipulated by the sponsor. The year that is going to be from the beginning, you already know if there's going to be 15 years, 20 years, depends on the sponsor. So you need to make sure that this file is going to be archived for the years that has been described before. And this archiving, usually the ISF is 3 or 4 dossiers, and so for a very high department with a lot of studies, you need to be aware of where is going to be archived, not just where going to be archived, but with restricted access again. And for that period, for 20 years, where that is going to be archived. And the location of those dossiers needs to be given to the sponsor in the end of the trial. And you as a principal investigator, you are going to be responsible through all that period. So if you move to another, you need to make sure that you inform, so the things are correctly done. About monitoring. So the role of the monitor is to overseeing the progress of the clinical trial, and he's going to make sure that all the procedures are done according to the protocol, and the data is recorded in an accurate manner, and the GCP is followed, and all the applicable regulatory requirements are followed. So he's going to help and to make sure everything is going to be done in according to protect again the safety and the well-being of the patient. This is the main purpose. So it is going to make sure that everything is going to be in place. An audit is a systematic and independent examination of a trial related to the activities, and is usually, of course, done by someone from the sponsor, and is the same purpose, is to evaluate that activities are going to be conducted and data recorded and analyzed, and everything is going to be correct. The inspection is another thing, is a regulatory authority that is officially to conduct a review of the documents, not just the documents, but also the facilities, the records, and the other resources that can be related to the clinical trial. And this inspection can be done not just at the site, but also to the sponsor, or to the CRO, to the contract research organization. So it's not just at the site; it's all the involved stakeholders that can have an inspection. And this audit, this inspection can be done after the study is closed. So during that period that I have said before, it can be requested, and the document must be retrieved. So the difference between audit and inspection, I don't know if you had the experience with this before in your places. Yes? It was an audit or an inspection?
An audit.
An audit, okay. So usually it's performed, as I said, by the sponsor or the CRO, by an internal qualified auditor, and in an inspection is a qualified and certified inspector from the health authorities, where both can be done at the site, the sponsor, also in the investigational medical product where it's produced and the storage facilities for the medication, and also external vendors. For example, the core labs or the central clinical laboratory that is working together for the clinical research, they can have also an audit or an inspection. How is the choice for an audit or an inspection? Usually for an audit is if there are high patients enrollment or lack of retention of the patient, if the patients withdraw and they are not, or they are lost to follow up in a high number, so there is an audit to see what's going on in that side. If there is a high staff turnover, if the research team is changing all the time, so that is not very consistently good, of course, and it can be a cause for an audit. If there are an abnormal number of adverse events reporting, or very high or very low, as you know, there is lots of metrics comparing sites and the reports of adverse events as a rate according to the number of patients included, and sometimes there are sites that really are not reporting adverse events, and that can be also a reason for an audit. And a fraud suspicion that can happen too. For an inspection, a high patient enrollment, so in this case, is of course to know if the inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria are really taken care of, and they are really strictly evaluated, and again a fraud suspicion. And when both can occur before, during, or after a clinical trial is conducted. And of course, all these activities are done by a personnel which is totally independent of the trial, of course. Again, about the quality, the sponsor must have disqualified individuals in order to supervise the overall conduction of the trial. And the quality management system should use a risk-based approach based on the critical process and data identification, the risk identification, the risk evaluation, and risk control. So this is more related to quality control, and also risk communication, risk review, risk reporting. So these are all very essential. The quality control is the operational techniques and the activities undertaken by a quality assurance system to verify that the requirements for the quality of the trial related activities are fulfilled. So they may identify a problem and implement a solution. This quality control is continuous during the research. It's carried out by people conducting the work. And the quality system needs to be proportionate to the risk that has been evaluated before. What are the benefits for this quality control and quality assurance? For the investigator, of course, is to assist the investigator to maintain a quality data and records. It's not just to have any kind of corrections, or is really for him to make sure that he's collecting the data in the correct way. Also to implement the protocol correctly, because it can happen that the protocol is not followed strictly by any mistake. And also for the investigator to be ready for a possible regulatory inspection. So it's always it's always very good to have someone controlling what you are doing, and so you are sure that you are doing in the correct way. Also to assist the sponsor, the other side, to maintain awareness of the trial progress, to have the adherence to the GCP regulations and guidelines, and submit data suitable for regulatory approval. And of course, all of this is related with the patient's protection. This is the main purpose of this quality control and quality assurance. Okay, this is the similar, I'm not going to... About monitoring that you are more familiar with. So The sponsor should develop a systematic and a risk-based approach monitoring in clinical trials that, and he might choose that the sites are, the monitoring is on site, so at the site, or centralized monitoring, or both. And he needs to document this in their monitoring plan and strategy, and the site usually is informed about this. The monitoring reports should be given to the sponsor by the monitors in a timely manner, so they can review and follow up and make any changes of any implementation of a correction if needed. The results of the monitoring activities should be detailed to check the compliance with the agreed monitoring plan. And the monitoring plan developed by the sponsor should be tailored to the risk of the study. So if it's on site, how many visits are going to be done, how many patients are going to be verified. This is all described and planned before by the sponsor. So the risk-based monitoring approach is much more recent, and it has been increasing a lot. So the difference is that the source data verification, the verification I have said before, from the CRF to the source data, is going to be done by the monitor only in a sample of patients' data, not all the patients, and this will make sure that the site will have the responsibility to do all the data collection and all the procedures correctly. So he won't have the monitor to verify everything that they are doing, all the sample of the patients. So not all the patients are going to be verified, only that percentage. And so the SDV will be increased only to address if there is a need for increasing the number of patients to be verified. That needs to be decided by the sponsor if there is any risk or if there is any deviation, any major deviation, any report that might be occurred. Compliance checks are done remotely. For example, the adherence to the protocol through the CRF, that is, of course, as you know, the queries that are open, all the questions that you might receive in the CRF is there to make sure that the safe of the patient is prevail and there is adherence to the protocol. And these compliance checks are done for all the patients, not just for a sample data. So as you know, the new data protection regulation, I'm sure that you have this also, you are aware of this, was designed to harmonize the data privacy laws across Europe to protect and empower all the EU citizens in data privacy and reshape the way organizations across the region approach data privacy. And this has been, there were some changes during the clinical trials that it needs to be included in the consent form, this new regulation. This is just for you to bear in mind, not going to be more. And about the investigational product management, the IMP, the medical product, besides being, it can be, of course, a comparator, it can include a comparator or a placebo, and the manufacturer is in accordance with applicable GMP, and is coded and labeled in the manner that protects the blinding and in accordance with applicable regulatory requirements. The decoding and unblinding procedure, there must be in place, and the investigators, they need to be trained about this procedure in case of medical emergency. And this needs, again, to be registered, this training in the unblinding procedure. The investigator or the assigned qualified pharmacist, because it depends on the way the structure of the site, can be responsible for maintaining the investigational product records, which include information on the amounts that were delivered, how was all the dispensed medication, what has been returned by the patient, what has been sent for destruction. These trackers and these these logs needs to be in place. Usually it's at the pharmacy, but depends on the site, of course. They must be also sure about the storage conditions of the medical product, if they are maintained and in the storage conditions that were described in the protocol. If there is a temperature restriction, it needs to be verified if everything has been complied. And the documents about the temperature, dates, the quantities, the batch numbers, the expiry dates, this is all taken care. And of course, ensuring that the investigational products are used only for, as specified in the approved protocol. Because as you know, depends on the protocol, there can be changes on the doses, etc. So it must be ensured that it's according to the protocol. And keeping a list of the randomization codes of the patients. So you, of course, you have the tracker. Usually these are systems that are electronically managed, but you can have another system, not so complete. So you need to be aware that this randomization code, it's really tracked to be assigned to the participants. And the reconciliation of all the investigational product received from the pharmacy, and again, what has been sent, what has been destroyed. This is just one example of what is collected, for example, at the pharmacy. The date of the visit, the date of the study treatment, the labor, the batch number, the TU number, which is on the box. This is just for you to have an idea of all the trackers that needs to be done at the pharmacy. For example, what has been sent for destruction needs to be verified and signed by the monitor or the pharmacist. And of course, this you are going to manage, of course, with the IWRS system for the randomization. So you have all the trackers of the investigation medical product. So again, like an audit or an inspection can include the pharmacy and how the medical product is handled. And just an overview, all these responsibilities that we are discussing are shared. Of course, it's not just investigator, it's the ethics committee, is the sponsor, the monitor as well. So all of them, they have shared responsibilities. Some of them are specific, but is a shared one. About the sponsor, so who can be the sponsor? Can be an individual, can be a company, a government agency, an academic institution, and a private organization. They are responsible for the study initiation, the management of the whole clinical trial, the financial part of the clinical trial. They need to make sure that they are going to oversight any trial-related duties. The functions carried out on its behalf, for example, if they are delegating their activities to a CRO, to an external company, then they need to make sure that they are going to proceed as accordingly to what is contracted, and to implement appropriate corrective and preventive action plans when it's necessary, not just for the site activity, for example. And when a contract research organization that is more common nowadays, it's a company that is going to provide support to the pharmaceutical, medical device industry in the form of research services that are going to be outsourced on a contract basis. So the CRO can provide these services as a scientific consultancy, for example, to design the protocol, the documentation for a clinical trial, regulatory advisory and activity to request approvals. Also during the management of the clinical trial for monitoring, for example, and pharmacovigilance. And it's a safe and excellent choice for the sponsors. Sometimes they really rely on CROs because they don't have their own departments for for several reasons. And so this is just to emphasize that when the sponsor outsourced to the CRO, it's the responsibility of the CRO to make sure that the activities are conducted, but ultimate responsibility is from the sponsor because they are the ones contracting an external company. So the responsibility of the quality and the integrity of the data remains on the sponsor side. And the sponsor can delegate activities, all of them, or just part of it. For example, just monitoring or just regulatory. And you at your site, you need to know exactly with whom you are contacted. If you are contacting the sponsor, you are contacting CRO. So just to make sure that you know the involvement of all the stakeholders. And also the CRO should implement the quality assurance and the quality control systems. So this is just an example, just for you to see when there is a CRO for the fully activities involved, the contact with the ethics committee, etc., with the study team is directly with the CRO. About the investigator, I'm not going to make in more detail. You know already is the responsible leader of the whole team that is going to conduct the study. And the sub-investigator is an individual member of the clinical team that is designated and supervised by the principal investigator at the site to perform the clinical trial activities that he's going to delegate on him. And they have specific responsibilities, and they need to be aware, not just the part, of course, of the informed consent form, to know the randomization procedures and the unblinding when is needed. He needs to make sure he has the access for the unblinding, and he knows how to do it in case of an emergency. The medical care of the study participants, which is obvious. Also the communication with the ethics committee. And he's responsible for the investigational product handling and management at the site. There are cases in that this responsibility relies only on the pharmacy department, for example, but that is very specific and it is written, the responsibilities of each of them. But usually it's the PI who has the responsibility to make sure that at the pharmacy everything is done correctly. The compliance of the study protocol, not just for him, but the whole team that needs to be compliant with the study protocol. So regular meetings should be done, training if needed, not just at the beginning, but through the whole process, and especially if there are changes in the study team, which happens, of course, in long-term clinical trials. He has to make sure that he has qualified staff, that he has the records and the reports management are in place too. The safety reporting of adverse events, that is not just, it's his responsibility, but again, the sub-investigators, they need to be aware of what needs to be reported and the whole process. And he needs to guarantee the adequate resources for the trial. For example, if it's needed specific equipment, he has to make sure the equipment is there and through the whole period. And the management of premature suspension of a study that can happen, how that is managed, I will speak again later on. And the reporting and final reports of the progress reports and final reports of the trial. Again, the importance of the investigator brochure. And the last line is that the investigator must allow the study to be monitored, audited and inspected to enable oversight by the sponsor or the regulatory authorities. And this can be also, again, obvious, but sometimes there are the monitor, he needs to have access to the medical records through the investigator, of course, not direct access. And sometimes the investigator, they don't really like to give that access, but it needs to be done because it's the only way that the monitor can verify the data, which is which is of course essential to verify if what is written in the CRF, it's in the medical records on the source documents. And the investigator can delegate some activities and duties to a qualified staff of the team. And this must be clearly recorded in the study delegation log or responsibilities log. This is just an example. So you have the principal investigator in the beginning, on the top, and then you will have here the list of all the research team, their function, if it's sub-investigator, if it's a nurse, if it's a technician, their name, and the tasks delegated by the principal investigator. Usually these tasks is a list which is in the end with all the activities, so he will delegate those tasks to that person. And the start date of the person participating in the study, the signature, the initials, and again the certification by the principal investigator. And this document is one of the most important documents that the monitors verified and that the PI needs to be aware of and responsible for, because it's when it's clearly dated which are the tasks and when the research member started in the study. So these are going to be cross-checked with the signatures in source documents, in the informed consent form that, of course, some investigator can only sign the consent form with the patient if after he is included in the study team. So if you have a date before this date here, something is totally wrong. So it means that he was trained just after giving consent to the patient. So this is a very, very important document. And it's a live document because it's changing if someone changes, if there is additional tasks that can be added later on in the clinical trial. So if you are participating in a clinical research, go and look at this document because you will understand and you will see the importance of it. This is an example of how it can be. So you have here the several tasks code, and you have there is just an example of an end date of someone that has stopped their activities in the trial or for any other reason. So after that date, he should not do any activity related with the trial, and this is going to be verified. About safety reporting, so I'm going just to speak about this more generally. As you know, all the adverse events that are specified in the protocol, and exceptionally, of course, the serious adverse event, they need to be reported immediately to the sponsor. And usually this is done through the CRF, through the electronic CRF. And you should do it as soon as you know. Even if you have very few information, you should do it, and then you update with the new information that you might have. It must be supplied, the investigator should supply additional information or any of reported deaths if may occur, even if an adverse event is done in another site. He has to retrieve the documentation for that adverse event if it's possible. And when the reports are sent and the source documents are sent externally for the adjudicators of the event, of course they need to be anonymized. Then the identification of the patient can never go outside the site. So you need to be aware of this. And again, the principal investigator must be sure that all the staff that has the task of reporting adverse events know all the procedures and know all the requirements for the safety reporting. Okay, I'm not going to describe what is an adverse event. This is in the GCP. I'm sure that you all know the definition. I'm not going to... These are the general definitions, but sometimes there are specific adverse events, pre-specified adverse events in the protocol that you need to be really aware what needs to be reported in that protocol. So there is always a section of safety reporting in the protocol, so make sure that everyone reads it, who has that responsibility. So you have serious adverse event, adverse drug reaction, unexpected adverse drug reactions, and this is where sometimes the investigator brochure is essential for you to be totally informed about if it is expected, if it's not expected. Of course, that when this classification is not done by you, you report the adverse event, but of course is important that you know what is the whole classification of the reports. When you are reporting an adverse event, there are things that you need to take into account, and you should describe it in the medical records, which is the causality of the adverse event in relation, of course, with the protocol. That is the main concern of the sponsor. That can be definitely, probably, possibly, unlikely, unrelated, or not accessible. If it's not accessible, usually the sponsor will assume that it is related with the protocol until there is further information that will not confirm that. So this is just a guidance for you to classify an adverse event, which must be very detailed. And if you have experience in this, you know that in the CRF lots of questions appear, and there is a lot of information requested about the adverse event. Also, the seriousness and all this classification, if you have it in the CRF, you need to have it in the medical records of the patient. So an adverse event occurs, mild, moderate, or severe, or a life-threatening or fatal. And you should classify it according to this classification. The safety reports, the non-serious adverse events are recorded in the study case report form, which are non-serious. You just report them if requested by the sponsor. Usually the serious adverse events are reported to the sponsor in the CRF within 24 hours. And again, it's the information you have. If you have just that information, you just write that and then you update. And if the serious adverse events are life-threatening or result in death, of course, and which are unexpected and possibly related to the study interventional, needs to be reported to the ethics committee within 7 calendar days, or other serious adverse event within 15 calendar days. But all of these specifications are in the protocol, in that section of the protocol. So make sure that you read it. Of course, you will be trained on this, but you have it in mind during the whole process of the clinical trials. And this is where, when I said before that the principal investigator signs the protocol agreement, the signature page, he's confirming that he's going to follow this safety reporting, the safety reports. When the management of the premature termination and also suspension of the trial, if there is a decision from the sponsor to terminate or suspend the study, if there is if this happens, of course, all the relevant bodies they need to be informed as soon as possible, and with the reasons for the suspension or early termination of the trial. And the investigator must inform all the participants by phone or by letter, or he can choose how he's going to inform. And this information must be, again, written in the medical record that the patient was informed of the termination or suspension of the trial. He must assess if there are treatment requirements or what is the how is going to be the follow-up for the medical care of that patient, because suddenly he stopped participating in the trial. He can arrange to see the participants individually, and he must inform the institution where he is working about in the ethics committee that with a detailed written report that usually the sponsor provides, informing that there was the termination and suspension of the of the trial. This is just an overview of the whole responsibilities of the sponsor, and when, of course, the investigator is also involved. Just to summarize, since the beginning, so you have the country feasibility, so to select the countries that are going to participate. Then you have the site's feasibility. Then you have the regulatory submission for the request of the approvals, the site activations, the recruitment of the patients visit and monitoring, treatment period, database cleanup, and then analyze and report. So the whole process since the beginning, it's the responsibility that they need to be taken care of. Usually you are more involved after the site activation, but if you are a PI, you are going to be involved since the beginning, of course, since the selection of your site, request of documentation, the approvals. So you need to be aware of all these steps. So one more quiz, So before allocating the study procedures to the different elements of the study team, they should be adequately informed and trained on which of the following topics. Select the most complete option. Investigational medical product, protocol, good clinical practice, and informed consent. The monitoring plan and the Declaration of Helsinki. The good clinical practice and regulations for the clinical trials implementation. The investigation medical product, the study monitoring plan, and informed consent. Oh, sorry. Okay, it was obvious. There's no more. Of course, he needs to be aware of the monitoring plan, but it's not the most important thing. And the other things, of course, he has to, but the complete answer is that one. The principal investigator should keep a list of the research members who trial tasks are delegated. What is the main purpose of this task record? Ensure that individuals that are performing different tasks and procedures related to the trial were properly trained and authorized by the principal investigator to execute the referred tasks. To record the names of the different team members on their start and their start date in the study. To record the participant names and their identification numbers in the study. To record the research team member signature so it's verifiable in the other documents. The main purpose. There is one more. The good training session date. Okay, this is not obvious. Yes. So this is the main purpose, but of course the other things are... The only one that is totally, of course, wrong is the C, because you don't have the participant names in this log. It's a different log, of course. But this topic of the signature of each team member is also important for the verification. The monitor. Which of the following are GCP responsibilities of the investigator? Please choose all that apply. Ensuring all study staff are sufficiently qualified. Communication with participant family members. Compliance with study protocol. Compensation of study participants. Reporting of serious adverse events. A plus C plus E. Okay, perfect. So he's not responsible, he can communicate with the family members, of course, but it's not a responsibility. And the compensation is from the sponsor side.